Humans were always an anomaly in the galactic records. When the great civilizations of the universe looked upon their history, they saw eras of unity, cultural enlightenment, and technological advancement that had propelled them into the stars. Conflicts were brief and controlled, resolved through diplomacy or the calculated application of force. Their gods of war were revered but measured, embodying the principles of strategy, honor, and restraint. Every species had its own version, a deity or a legendary figure who guided them through their struggles and ensured that war remained a tool, not a catastrophe. Then they discovered humanity. At first, humans seemed unremarkable. They were biologically fragile compared to the hardened exoskeletons of the Drexxar, the regenerative abilities of the Vocaner, or the sheer psychic dominance of the Solari. Their worlds were not particularly rich in rare elements, their physiology lacked natural weapons, and their technological level, while advanced, was not beyond what the Coalition had seen before. They were aggressive, certainly, but so were many species. What disturbed the Coalition was not their capacity for war but their philosophy regarding it. When a Solari historian first reviewed human mythologies, he was perplexed. Many civilizations had gods of war who represented their ideals of battle, figures who exemplified discipline, honor, and the responsible use of force. Humanity, however, had something different. Their gods of war were not noble protectors, they were monsters. Ares, the bloodthirsty butcher, Mars, the relentless destroyer, countless deities and figures across their cultures embodied war as something chaotic, ruthless, and devastating. It was as if humans never sought to control war, only to unleash it. And then the scholar found something even more unsettling: humanity had abandoned their gods of war. Some had faded into irrelevance, others were rewritten into softer, tamer forms. The Solari presented their findings to the Coalition's High Council with a dire warning. Humanity had no god of war because they had killed them. Not in the literal sense, but in a philosophical one. War, to them, was not a force guided by a divine hand or governed by rules of honor. It was simply a tool. And they had mastered it without needing a god to guide them. This revelation should have led to caution, but instead, it was ignored. Humanity's entry into the galactic community was not met with immediate hostility, but their rapid expansion and disregard for traditional diplomatic formalities made them a target. The Drexxar Dominion, seeing an opportunity, launched a preemptive strike against a newly colonized human world. They expected resistance, of course, but they had no idea what they had just awakened. The Coalition had fought wars before, but none like this. Humans did not engage in battle for honor, for the preservation of their way of life, or for any reason the Coalition could understand. Their war was one of annihilation. They did not send warnings or issue ultimatums, they simply calculated the most efficient way to destroy their enemy and executed it with cold precision. The Dominion's fleets were met not with counter-offensives or defensive maneuvers but with ruthless, unpredictable strikes that shattered entire formations in hours. Human soldiers did not retreat when their lines broke, they adapted, using the wreckage of their fallen to create new fortifications on the battlefield. They turned planetary invasions into endless nightmares of urban warfare, where every street became a killing field and every ruined building a trap. The Coalition watched in horror as humanity did not just defeat the Drexxar, they erased them. Planets were not merely occupied, but rendered uninhabitable through orbital bombardments that turned lush worlds into wastelands. The Drexxar homeworld itself fell in less than a year, its skies blackened with the wreckage of its once proud navy. The last transmission from the Dominion's ruling council was a desperate plea for surrender, but humanity did not acknowledge it. The war did not end because treaties were signed or peace was negotiated. It ended because there was no one left to fight back. Only then did the Coalition realize the full weight of their mistake. Every species had a god of war, a guiding force that shaped their philosophy of conflict. Humans had no such figure because they had never needed one. War, to them, was not sacred. It was not a necessary evil. It was simply an equation to be solved, a problem to be eliminated. The Coalition convened an emergency summit to discuss humanity's actions, but the damage was already done. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted forever. What frightened the remaining civilizations the most was not just the destruction humanity had wrought, but the ease with which they had done it. The humans were not proud of their victory. They did not celebrate it. They simply moved on, their war machines already preparing for whatever came next. The coalition's greatest military strategists reviewed the battles and came to a chilling conclusion: humanity had not even fought at full strength. The war against the Drexxar had been, for them, a limited engagement. If the coalition ever became their enemy, there would be no negotiations, no warnings, and no survivors. Point 1. Humanity's rejection of a war deity. Unlike other civilizations that revere gods of war for guidance and honor, humanity abandoned or destroyed theirs, seeing war as nothing more than a tool to be perfected without divine intervention. 2. The ruthless efficiency of human warfare. When provoked, humans wage war with cold, calculated precision, treating it as an equation rather than a test of honor or strength, leading to the complete annihilation of their enemies. 3. The Galactic Coalition's terrifying realization. After witnessing humanity's overwhelming and emotionless destruction of the Drexxar, the Coalition finally understands that humans were never fighting at full strength, and if they ever become enemies, no one in the galaxy will survive. Humanity was an anomaly among the stars. Every species that reached a certain level of advancement had its own philosophy regarding war, its own cultural interpretations of violence and conflict. For many, war was seen as a necessary evil, something to be waged with caution, precision, and honor. The galactic civilizations had their war deities, figures that represented the ideals of strategy, discipline, and the restrained use of power. These entities were revered as guiding forces, ensuring that war never descended into mindless destruction but remained a controlled tool, a last resort rather than a first option. When humanity entered the galactic stage, they were studied carefully. Physically unimpressive compared to the dominant species of the coalition, their bodies were weaker, their lifespans shorter, and their technology, while innovative, was not beyond the grasp of the galactic standard. They expanded quickly, negotiating aggressively, but not outright hostile. However, it was when alien scholars delved into human history and mythology that true unease began to spread among the other races. The first warning came from a Solari historian tasked with compiling an analysis of human war traditions. What he found was disturbing. Unlike most species, whose deities of war embodied concepts of honor, duty, and restraint, humans had a very different relationship with the concept of war. Their gods were not wise protectors or noble warriors but embodiments of bloodlust, chaos, and unrelenting destruction. The Solari documented ancient figures such as Ares, a war god feared even by his own pantheon for his unrestrained violence, and Mars, whose dominion was over conquest rather than strategy. Even in cultures that did not explicitly have gods of war, the most celebrated figures of human history were not philosophers or rulers but conquerors, generals, and tacticians who had reshaped entire continents through warfare. As the historian continued his research, he made an even more terrifying discovery: humans had abandoned their war gods. Across their history, as civilization advanced, the figures once feared and worshipped had been cast aside, rewritten, or erased entirely. In some cases, these figures were softened, their edges dulled, and their stories reshaped to fit new narratives of wisdom and justice rather than raw destruction. In others, they simply faded into irrelevance, ignored as humanity advanced past the need for divine justification in their wars. The historian presented his findings to the Coalition's High Council, urging them to recognize the implications. Humans did not revere war as something sacred or noble. They had no guiding force tempering their conflicts, no cultural or spiritual barrier that prevented them from descending into total annihilation. Where other species waged war with ritual, rules, and restraint, humanity treated war as nothing more than an equation to be solved. They had removed the divinity from war, stripped it of all honor and tradition, reducing it to its most primal function, absolute victory. This revelation should have led to caution, but it was ignored. The Coalition saw humanity's rapid expansion, their disregard for conventional diplomacy, and their unwillingness to conform to galactic traditions as an issue, but not a dire threat. When tensions between humanity and the Drexxar Dominion escalated, the Coalition did not intervene, assuming that the conflict would be settled as all others had, with treaties, negotiations, and, at worst, controlled engagements that ended in political settlements. The Drexxar Dominion saw an opportunity. They believed that humanity, being new to the galactic stage, would not withstand a decisive first strike. Their fleets launched a preemptive attack on a newly established human colony, expecting resistance but ultimately assuming they could force humanity into surrender through superior numbers and firepower. It was a decision they would regret. The response was immediate and unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Human fleets did not fight like the Coalition's military forces. They did not posture, did not issue threats, and did not negotiate. There were no demands, no ultimatums, no attempts to preserve diplomatic relations. Humanity simply analyzed the problem and executed the most efficient solution: total war. The Drexxar expected counterattacks, expected battles fought in strategic locations with measured force, expected a war that followed the understood conventions of galactic conflict. What they got was annihilation. Human fleets did not engage in prolonged battles. They shattered Drexxar forces in overwhelming, surgical strikes that left no survivors. Their ground forces did not follow the standard approach of taking cities, securing positions, and holding territory. Instead, they turned entire planets into battlefields where every street became a death trap and every inch of land was contested with ruthless efficiency. Drexxar generals attempted to retreat, to regroup, to negotiate surrender, but humanity did not stop. The war was not fought for honor, for territory, or for vengeance. It was fought with the singular goal of removing the threat entirely. Within months, entire Drexxar colonies were reduced to lifeless husks. The Drexxar homeworld, once a thriving capital of trade and military might, was encircled by human warships that rained destruction upon it until its surface was little more than smoldering ruin. The last remnants of the Dominion's leadership sent desperate pleas to the Coalition, begging for intervention, for mediation, for anything that would stop the relentless advance of humanity's forces. By the time the Coalition convened to discuss the war, it was already over. The Drexxar were gone. Their military, their leadership, their entire civilization had been reduced to nothing. The Coalition members, many of whom had assumed humanity was simply another aggressive but manageable species, were now faced with a horrifying reality: humanity did not fight wars. They ended them. In the aftermath, the surviving species of the Coalition re-examined the Solari historians' warnings. The Drexxar had believed that war was a game of power, a test of strength and will. They had assumed humanity would play by the same rules. But humans had no god of war guiding them, no sense of reverence for battle, no restrictions placed upon them by cultural traditions or divine oversight. They had killed their war gods long ago, stripping away the philosophy that governed conflict and reducing war to nothing more than a series of actions leading to an inevitable conclusion. For the first time in centuries, the Coalition experienced true fear. They had assumed they understood the nature of war, that every species approached conflict with the same fundamental beliefs. But humanity had proven them wrong. The question now was not whether humanity would wage war again, it was whether the galaxy could survive if they ever decided to. Humanity had always been an enigma to the Galactic Coalition. Among the countless species that had risen to prominence in the stars, each had developed an understanding of war, a philosophy that dictated how conflict was waged and resolved. For some, war was a sacred duty, an act of honor that followed strict codes of conduct. For others, war was a necessary evil, carefully regulated and controlled to minimize unnecessary destruction. Every species had its own approach, shaped by history, culture, and the belief that war should always serve a higher purpose. When humanity emerged onto the galactic stage, they were initially dismissed as unremarkable. Their biology was unimpressive compared to the dominant powers of the Coalition. They lacked the Drexxar's natural armor, the Solari's psychic abilities, or the Vulcaners' ability to regenerate from mortal wounds. Their technology was effective but not revolutionary, and their homeworld, while rich in diversity, was not an extraordinary marvel compared to the great capitals of the Coalition. They expanded aggressively, negotiated stubbornly, and refused to conform to the traditional hierarchy that governed interstellar diplomacy. It was only when scholars began studying their history that the first signs of true concern appeared. The Solari historian Jalaris Caven was one of the first to take a deep dive into humanity's mythology and war traditions. What he found unsettled him deeply. Most civilizations had gods of war, deities that represented their ideals of battle, honor, discipline, restraint, or strategy. But humanity's war gods were different. Throughout their history, human cultures had depicted war as a force of chaos and destruction. Their deities of war, rather than noble protectors or wise tacticians, were often monstrous figures feared even by their own worshippers. Ares, a being of pure bloodlust and rage, was often portrayed as reckless and destructive. Mars, though slightly more strategic, was still a god of conquest rather than wisdom. Many cultures had personified war not as an honorable struggle but as an unrelenting force of devastation, indifferent to morality or rules. Even more unsettling was what happened to these figures over time. The historian discovered that, unlike other species, humanity had largely abandoned or erased their gods of war. Some had been rewritten, their brutal natures softened into something more acceptable to a civilized world. Others had simply faded away, discarded as relics of a less advanced past. To Galactic, the implications were terrifying. In every other civilization, the existence of a war god or an equivalent figure served as a guiding force, ensuring that war was waged with purpose, within limits. These figures were not just symbols of destruction but of control, helping their people balance the necessity of violence with the importance of restraint. But humanity had removed that balance entirely. They had stripped war of all reverence, treating it not as an honorable endeavor but as a problem to be solved with maximum efficiency. Galactic presented his findings to the Coalition's High Council, warning that humans did not view war the way other species did. Where the Coalition saw conflict as a tool with defined rules and expectations, humanity saw only a means to an end. They had no guiding principles restraining them, no divine or philosophical boundary that limited how far they would go. If war came, it would not be fought with honor or ritual. It would be fought to win, and nothing else would matter. His warnings were dismissed. The Coalition had dealt with aggressive species before and believed humanity was no different. Their rapid expansion and disregard for diplomatic traditions made them a concern, but not an immediate threat. The real danger, the Coalition believed, was the Drexxar Dominion, a long-standing military power that had clashed with various factions over the centuries. When tensions between humanity and the Drexxar escalated, the Coalition assumed it would play out as most conflicts did. A few skirmishes, some territorial disputes, and eventually, a peace settlement. The Drexxar, seeing humanity as an upstart species with little experience in galactic warfare, decided to strike first. A surprise attack was launched on a newly colonized human world, wiping out settlements and obliterating orbital defenses before reinforcements could arrive. It was meant to be a show of force, a demonstration that humanity should know its place and accept terms before the war escalated further. But humanity did not react as expected. There were no diplomatic negotiations, no attempts to de-escalate, no threats or counteroffers. There was only a cold, methodical response. Human fleets mobilized with alarming speed, and their counteroffensive was brutal. They did not engage in the traditional strategic posturing that the Coalition was used to. They did not attempt to capture Drexxar worlds for leverage. They simply destroyed everything in their path. The Drexxar had prepared for war, but not for annihilation. They expected a fight over territory, a contest of strength where control over key systems would determine the outcome. But humans did not fight for control, they fought to eliminate the threat entirely. The first Drexxar fleets that engaged human forces were obliterated within hours. Humanity did not follow conventional tactics, did not give their enemies time to regroup or counter. They struck with overwhelming force, destroying entire armadas in surgical strikes before moving on to the next target. The Drexxar War Council scrambled to mount a defense, expecting humanity to push into their outer colonies. Instead, human forces bypassed them entirely, heading straight for core worlds and logistical hubs, cutting off supply lines and communications in a series of perfectly executed attacks. On the ground, the situation was even worse. The Drexxar military had centuries of experience in planetary warfare, expecting prolonged sieges and controlled engagements. Human soldiers did not engage in conventional warfare. They adapted instantly, turning entire cities into lethal traps where every structure became a weapon, every ruined street a new battlefield. The Drexxar were used to fighting enemies that followed predictable patterns, but humanity's approach was relentless, unconventional, and merciless. Panic spread through the Dominion as planet after planet fell. The Drexxar homeworld itself, once thought untouchable, was blockaded and then bombarded from orbit until it became uninhabitable. Their leadership, now realizing the true scale of their mistake, sent desperate messages to the Coalition, pleading for intervention, for mediation, for anything that could stop humanity's advance. But the Coalition had no answer. They had underestimated humanity, assuming they could be reasoned with, that they would follow the same principles of war that had governed interstellar conflict for centuries. Instead, they had unleashed something they did not understand. When the war finally ended, it did not end with treaties or negotiations. It ended because there was nothing left of the Drexxar to fight back. Humanity had not claimed their territory, had not occupied their worlds. They had simply erased them. In the aftermath, the Coalition re-examined Jalaris's warnings. Humanity had no god of war because they had never needed one. They did not see war as something to be guided by divine hands or moral principles. They saw it as a problem to be solved, an equation with only one acceptable outcome: victory. The realization sent shockwaves through the remaining civilizations. If humanity had fought the Drexxar with such brutal efficiency, and if they had done so without even considering it a total war effort, then what would happen if they ever turned their attention to the rest of the galaxy? The Coalition had assumed they understood the nature of conflict, that war had rules, traditions, and expectations. But humanity had proven them wrong. And now, every species that had once dismissed them as just another civilization had to ask themselves a terrifying question. What happens when humanity decides that someone else is a problem to be solved? Humanity had always been an anomaly in the grand tapestry of the galaxy. Among the many species that had risen and fallen throughout the cosmos, each had their own philosophies on war. The Drexxar believed in battle as a sacred ritual, where warriors met in honorable combat and lived or died by the blade. The Solari waged war as a complex game of strategy, ensuring that conflicts ended with a balance of power and minimal destruction. The Vulcaner saw war as a necessary evil, always striving to end it quickly to maintain peace and order. Every race had their own methods, their own gods of war who dictated how conflict was meant to be fought. But humans were different. At first, they seemed like just another fledgling species, another race reaching for the stars with naive ambition. Their technology was nothing groundbreaking, their physiology unimpressive compared to the giants of the galaxy. They lacked the natural armor of the Drexxar, the psychic abilities of the Solari, or the biological resilience of the Vulcaner. Their worlds were varied but unremarkable, their political systems fragmented and inefficient. The Galactic Coalition observed them with curiosity but did not consider them a serious power. They would expand, struggle, and eventually be absorbed into the wider structure of the galaxy like so many others before them. That assumption began to falter when scholars started studying human history. The Solari historian Jalaris Caven was the first to sound the alarm. He had dedicated decades to studying the mythologies and war traditions of different species, cataloging how civilizations approached violence and conflict. When he turned his attention to humanity, what he found disturbed him deeply. Most species had gods of war, divine figures who represented their ideals of battle. These gods were often wise, strategic, honorable. Even the most aggressive civilizations maintained some form of reverence toward war, shaping their conflicts around principles that had been established over millennia. War was never just destruction, it was a means to an end, bound by rules and customs. Humanity, however, had abandoned those traditions. Their ancient war deities, once fierce and uncontrollable, had been rewritten or discarded entirely. Ares, the Greek god of war, was depicted as reckless, bloodthirsty, and foolish. Mars, his Roman counterpart, was associated more with military conquest than honor. Other cultures had their own war deities, but none were truly revered. Unlike other species, humans did not deify war. They did not see it as a sacred act, nor did they view it with the restraint of a higher power guiding them. Instead, they treated war as a problem, one to be solved with brutal efficiency. Jalaris presented his findings to the Coalition's High Council, warning them that humanity did not view war the same way as others did. He argued that humans were dangerous not because of their strength, but because of their mindset. Without a guiding force restraining them, they would fight wars in ways the galaxy had never seen. There would be no rituals, no ceremonies, no carefully orchestrated conflicts to establish dominance. There would only be absolute, decisive action. The Council dismissed his warnings. Humanity was still young, still struggling to find its place in the galaxy. Their conflicts were loud and aggressive, but they had not yet proven themselves to be a true threat. The Coalition had dealt with warlike species before. What difference would humanity make? The answer came when the Drexxar Dominion launched their surprise attack. The Drexxar had long considered themselves the dominant military force of the region. They had crushed countless foes in ritualized combat, proving their strength time and time again. When humanity refused to abide by coalition protocols and began expanding into contested territories, the Drexxar saw an opportunity to put them in their place. A single, overwhelming strike against a newly established human colony would be enough to break their will. The attack was swift and brutal. Entire cities were wiped out in hours. The Drexxar expected humanity to retaliate in kind, to meet them on the battlefield for a test of strength. They believed that humans, like all other species, would follow the rules of war. They were wrong. There were no demands for negotiations, no diplomatic envoys seeking to de-escalate the situation. There was no declaration of war. There was only a response, calculated, immediate, and merciless. Within days, human fleets mobilized with terrifying precision. Their counter-offensive was unlike anything the Drexxar had ever faced. Humans did not fight for territory. They did not engage in prolonged battles of attrition. They did not honor the customs of ritualized combat. Instead, they struck with overwhelming force, annihilating entire Drexxar fleets before they had a chance to react. Their ships did not follow the traditional formations that the Drexxar were used to. They adapted instantly, shifting strategies mid-battle in ways that no other species had ever attempted. Their weapons were not meant to cripple or disable, they were meant to destroy. On the ground, the situation was even worse. The Drexxar prided themselves on their warrior culture, their ability to engage in close-quarters combat. But human soldiers did not fight like warriors, they fought like predators. They used unconventional tactics, turning entire battlefields into death traps. They ignored the traditional rules of engagement, using psychological warfare to break their enemies before a single shot was fired. Entire planets fell in days. The Drexxar, once confident in their superiority, found themselves being hunted. Their supply lines were cut with ruthless efficiency. Their command centers were destroyed before they could issue orders. Their armies, once feared across the galaxy, were wiped out before they even had a chance to fight. The Drexxar homeworld, believed to be an impenetrable fortress, was besieged and reduced to ruins. The Coalition watched in horror as the war unfolded, realizing too late that they had made a terrible mistake. Humanity had no god of war because they had never needed one. They did not see war as a sacred act, nor did they seek to glorify it. They saw it as a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed as efficiently as possible. And they had solved it. When the Drexxar finally surrendered, there was no grand negotiation, no peace treaty. Humanity did not demand reparations or territory. They simply ensured that the Drexxar would never be a threat again. Their fleets were dismantled, their leadership eradicated, their military traditions erased from history. The Coalition, once dismissive of humanity, now regarded them with silent terror. If this was how they responded to a minor conflict, what would happen if a true war broke out? How much of the galaxy would be left standing if humanity ever saw them as a threat? Jalaris Kaven, the scholar who had tried to warn them, was left with a chilling realization. War had always been a constant in the galaxy, a force guided by rules, traditions, and gods who ensured that conflicts never spiraled out of control. But humanity had no need for such restraints. The gods of war were dead, and humanity had been the ones to kill them.